Hello and welcome back to the channel. The last video covered Munchausen syndrome, and this video is going to cover a related disorder often called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So Munchausen syndrome by proxy, also known as factitious disorder imposed on another, is a complex and severe form of abuse which a caregiver, or often a parent or a guardian, intentionally fabricates or causes illness or injury to somebody under their care. The person affected by this form of abuse is often a child, although vulnerable adults can also be victims. So whereas Munchausen syndrome generally only affects the person who has the disorder, Munchausen syndrome by proxy is when the person with the disorder uses another person for the same reasons. Those reasons are typically to seek attention, sympathy, or the role of a heroic caregiver by presenting the individual under their care as sick or in need of medical intervention. Munchausen syndrome by proxy involves the deliberate creation or exaggeration of physical or psychological symptoms in another person to achieve these goals. So fabricated or induced illnesses cover a wide range of symptoms and behaviors involving parents or carers seeking healthcare for a child. This ranges from exaggerating or inventing symptoms to deliberately making the child ill. Behaviors in fabricated or induced illnesses, under which Munchausen syndrome by proxy would fall, can include a parent or carer who persuades healthcare professionals that their child is ill when they're healthy, exaggerates or lies about their child's symptoms. They manipulate test results to suggest the child is ill, for example by putting glucose in urine samples to suggest that the child might have diabetes, administering unnecessary medication, inducing physical harm, or even withholding essential medical care. Now, I mentioned child here, but as I said earlier, this can include vulnerable adults as well. So we touched on the motivations briefly, but generally the caregiver or the person who has Munchausen syndrome and using the other person as a proxy have a deep-seated need for attention, validation, or control. They may enjoy the power and attention they receive from being perceived as a devoted caregiver, and in some cases the caregiver may have an underlying psychological disorder or unresolved emotional issues driving their behavior. So the reason why these fabricated or induced illnesses happen are not completely understood, just like Munchausen syndrome itself. The parent or carer will have a need for their child to be treated as if they're ill or being more unwell than they really are. Their behavior is intended to convince doctors that the child is actually ill. This may be because the parent or carer gains something, not necessarily financial, but rather attention or support or even closeness to the child. It may also be because they have anxiety or abnormal beliefs about their child's health, and they need these beliefs to be confirmed and acted upon. The parent or carer is sometimes not always fully aware of the reasons for their own behavior. Indeed, a large number of parents or carers involved in fictitious illness or fictitiously induced illnesses have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorders, and these are characterized by emotional instability, impulsiveness, and disturbed thinking. A proportion of parents or carers who engage in these fictitiously induced illnesses also have Munchausen syndrome themselves. Some parents or carers have unresolved psychological and behavioral problems, such as a history of self-harming or drug and alcohol misuse, whereas some have experienced the death of another child. One could see why the behavior might change to an extreme to protect their current child if they had experienced the death of another child. There have also been several reported cases where illness was fabricated or induced for financial reasons, but as we discussed in the previous video, that's more likely to be a case of malingering rather than Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Symptoms that identify somebody who has Munchausen syndrome by proxy can be hard to spot. There are certain personality traits and backgrounds that do seem to be common, as mentioned. Many suffer from mental or physical or sexual abuse growing up, or they received love or attention only when they were sick. As adults, people with Munchausen syndrome by proxy are very interested in medicine, generally. They often work in the medical field, they can speak expertly about medical conditions, and they are typically very cooperative and friendly with healthcare professionals, and they always appear to be completely devoted to the well-being of their child, even though they're often the cause of their child being unwell. So while it can be difficult to identify somebody who could be diagnosed as having Munchausen syndrome by proxy, there are red flags to watch for, such as unexplained or inconsistent symptoms, symptoms that occur only when the caregiver is present, a lack of response to treatment, and a history of multiple medical consultations or hospitalizations. Essentially quite a lot of overlap between Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. As with Munchausen syndrome by proxy can actually have severe physical and psychological harm towards the victim. They may undergo unnecessary medical procedures, enduring physical pain, experience emotional trauma, and even face life-threatening situations. The long-term consequences can be profound, including medical complications and long-term psychological disorders. There's a lot more cases on Munchausen syndrome by proxy than there is in Munchausen syndrome itself. One of these is the case of Dee Dee Blanchard. So Dee Dee gained attention for the severe abuse she inflicted upon her daughter, whose name was Gypsy Rose Blanchard, through a combination of medical deception and manipulation. Dee Dee Blanchard portrayed her daughter, Gypsy Rose, as a severely ill child with multiple medical conditions, including leukemia, muscular dystrophy, asthma, and developmental disabilities. She went to great lengths to maintain this facade and subjected Gypsy Rose to unnecessary medical treatments, surgeries, and medication. This included the use of feeding tubes, wheelchairs, and other medical devices, despite the fact that Gypsy Rose was actually quite physically capable. The abuse went beyond pure medical manipulation. For instance, Dee Dee isolated Gypsy Rose from the outside world, closely controlling her interactions and limiting her access to education, friendships, and personal freedoms. Gypsy Rose was made to believe that she was seriously ill and entirely dependent on her mother's care. So that created a dynamic of complete control and reliance on Dee Dee, her mother. The case gained significant media attention in 2015 when Gypsy Rose orchestrated the murder of her mother. She felt trapped and desperate to escape the abusive situation, and she conspired with her then boyfriend to carry out the crime. And after this happened, it led to a re-evaluation of the circumstances surrounding Gypsy Rose's health, and that shed a light on the true nature of the abuse that she had endured. So while we can never really know Dee Dee's motivations, because of what happened, the case did spark discussion and raised awareness about Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and it shed light on the complexity of the disorder, as well as its devastating consequences. And that is all for today. I hope you found it interesting, and as always, drop a comment if you have something interesting to say, or even something that's not interesting. Always happy to read the comments. See you all next time.